Hi, everyone. I am going to talk through with you some notes on time of death. There is a link in Classroom to a notes packet. So please either have those up on your screen that you can type in or print them out, whatever is easier for you. Okay, so this is starting Unit 5, and we're calling this time of death. And before we start, let's just look at this question. Why is it important to homicide investigations to determine time of death? Okay, so a body is found. It could have been there a day, a week, a month. Why is that important? Well, in order to establish a timeline and look for suspects, you really need to know how long that body has been there. It makes people's alibis true or false. It sets in motion video surveillance cameras and eyewitnesses and all of those other leads. Okay, so the first thing is a definition of death, which not all experts agree on a strict definition. Okay, so some doctors will disagree with other doctors exactly when death occurs, especially now that we have so many life saving mechanisms with life support systems and things like that. So, in general, we're going to use this definition: the irreversible cessation of blood circulation, meaning when the heart stops, when blood stops flowing through the body, someone is no longer alive. It is generally a process rather than an event. It doesn't usually happen in 1 second, right? Something leads up to it. It may be rather drawn out and take a while. So that's why we say it's a process rather than one single event. And like I just mentioned, not all experts agree on a single strict definition. All right, so after somebody dies, or an animal dies, or a plant dies, any living thing, cells are going to start to break down. The first thing that happens is the cell membranes start to dissolve. So there's enzymes in your cells. Remember, lysosomes house enzymes that digest parts of the cell that are no longer needed. In this case, after death, lysosomes start to digest most of that cell. Liquefaction occurs, so parts of the body that used to be solids are a little more liquidy, and that's going to start with soft tissues and organs like the stomach and kidneys, bladder, things like that. Eyes, they're going to liquefy very quickly. And we call this whole process autolysis, like the auto meaning self, and so the breaking down of the self. Necrosis is a term that is linked just to death. So necrosis is autolysis that occurs after death. An autopsy, I'm sure you know what an autopsy is. It has to be performed by a medical doctor. So sometimes the medical examiners are not doctors. Oftentimes they are not doctors. So an autopsy is done in a hospital, most often by a pathologist. Any homicide requires an autopsy. Most unattended deaths, deaths that are not in a hospital, are going to require an autopsy. Sometimes, if you know somebody who died in the hospital, the doctors will ask the family if they want an autopsy. Decomposition is the breaking down of the whole body. So starts with the cells with autolysis, and then the entire body will decompose with the help of bacteria and with the help of insects. So generally, decomposition is fueled by bacteria. The bacteria that's naturally on the body is going to start to eat away at the flesh. Okay, so there's three different terms that the medical examiner is going to use: manner of death, cause of death, and mechanism of death. And they go in order from the most general to the most specific. So manner is the most general. So your manner of death that goes on the death certificate is the means by which someone dies. And the sometimes you'll see this divided into 6 categories. Most often it's 5. So, manner of death could be natural, like a heart attack, cancer, something like that; accidental, like a car accident or someone falls off a cliff; suicide; homicide; and then there's some that are undetermined. If the medical examiner cannot determine if it was a suicide or a homicide, or could not determine if it was an accidental death or a homicide, you may on a death certificate see undetermined. So we're much more likely to die a natural death, which I suppose is good news. After natural death, accidents are the next leading cause of death, and then suicide. So, cause of death is the reason. So, if someone dies in a homicide, homicide is the manner of death, and maybe shooting is the cause of death. Or if someone dies an accidental death, then the cause of death could be drowning. Here are some causes of death. So, these are natural deaths. So, the manner would be natural, and then the cause of death, heart attack, cancer, stroke, would all come under cause of death. Sometimes you see this term proximate cause of death. It's the underlying cause of death. So it could be radiation exposure that led someone to get cancer. It could be exposure to secondhand smoke that led someone to get lung cancer. So sometimes you see that proximate cause of death, sort of like something that goes along with it. All right, and lastly, we have mechanism of death. The mechanism of death is the actual change to the body that caused the death. All right, so if someone is stabbed during a homicide, so homicide's the manner of death, stabbing is the cause of death, but the mechanism of death, why did you actually die? It could be blood loss, it could be a severing of an artery, it could be a heart attack. So a very specific change in the body. All right, so let's go through some examples. So this says a man was stabbed during a robbery. He died as a result of the stab wounds. All right, so we're going to say manner of death was homicide, cause of death, stabbing, and mechanism of death, we'll say blood loss. All right, let's try one more example. A woman died after she hit a tree while skiing. She was not wearing a helmet. Manner of death, we would probably say accidental. Cause of death, skiing accident. And mechanism of death, swelling of the brain, severing of the brainstem, blood loss, take your pick. All right, one last part to our video today, and that's called livor mortis. So liver, notice the spelling Livor, not like the liver in your body. And mortis meaning death. So literally means death color. And this is what happens after someone passes away. Blood is going to start to collect in the tissues, and it's going to collect in the lowermost tissues, right, because of gravity. So when blood stops flowing through your arteries, it's going to start to pool. So if somebody is laying on their back, like this picture, the blood is going to go to their back. If someone is standing and somehow manages to stay standing, like they're propped up, blood's going to pool in their legs and feet. Someone on their front, the blood's going to pool in their face and the front of their body. So this is how livor mortis leads investigators to determine time of death. Livor mortis is going to begin about 2 hours after death. So that blood is going to pretty much stay in those arteries for a couple of hours. It becomes permanent after 8 hours, meaning if you move that body, the blood is not going to move with it. Right? So if the blood has pooled onto the person's back, like this individual, and you flip them onto their front, it's going to stay on the back. It's not going to now move down to the front. All right, so this is what livor mortis can tell us. It can give us clues into the time of death. It can tell us the position of the body during the first 8 hours after death. Were they on their back? Were they on their side? Were they sitting? And lastly, it can tell us if the body was moved. Right, so if you find a body like this, where the blood is pooling on its back, and if that body has been flipped over and you find it face down, then you know that that body has been moved. If you have filled in the notes up until this point, that's great. Feel free to scroll back for anything that you missed. And as always, email me with questions. Thank you.